The church bells were ringing, the guests were seated, and Elena Thornfield stood in her white dress. But the tears streaming down her face weren't tears of joy. In just 10 minutes, she would marry the richest man in Silverbrook, a man she feared. But outside, a simple rancher waited with 2 horses and a desperate plan that would change everything. This is the story of forbidden love in the Wild West, where choosing your heart over your duty could cost you everything. Welcome to the tale of Elena Thornfield, the sheriff's daughter who defied every rule to follow her heart. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let me take you back to 1878 Colorado Territory, where love was as dangerous as any outlaw. 3 months earlier, April 1878, Silverbrook, Colorado Territory. Elena Thornfield had always believed that life followed certain rules, just like the law her father enforced. Good people were rewarded, bad people were punished, and daughters of sheriffs married respectable men who could provide security and status. At 22, she had accepted that her future was already written in the ledger books of Silverbrook's most powerful families. Sheriff Joshua Thornfield was a man of absolute principles. He had built Silverbrook from a rough mining camp into a respectable town through sheer determination and an unwavering commitment to law and order. His word was law, his decisions final, and his expectations for his only daughter were crystal clear. "Elena," he would say, polishing his badge each morning, "you represent more than just yourself. You represent the law, order, and respectability of this town. People look up to us, and we must never let them down." That particular morning, Elena adjusted her blue calico dress and pinned her auburn hair into the proper style befitting the sheriff's daughter. Through her bedroom window, she could see the bustling main street where miners, ranchers, and merchants went about their daily business under the watchful eye of her father's authority. The town was thriving. The Blackwood silver mine was producing record amounts of ore. The railroad was planning to extend their line to Silverbrook within 2 years, and Eastern investors were pouring money into local businesses. Everything was perfect, orderly, and profitable. "Elena, dear, don't forget you're having tea with Mrs. Blackwood this afternoon," her mother, Margaret Thornfield, called from downstairs. "She wants to discuss the final arrangements for your engagement party." Elena's stomach tightened at the mention of William Blackwood's mother. The Blackwood family owned the largest silver mine in the territory, and William was considered the most eligible bachelor in 3 counties. At 35, he was successful, influential, and according to every mother in town, the perfect match for the sheriff's daughter. But Elena had seen something in William's pale gray eyes that made her skin crawl. A cold calculation that seemed to evaluate everything and everyone in terms of possession and profit. When he looked at her, she felt like a prize mare being assessed for breeding potential. "Of course, Mother," Elena replied, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. She had learned long ago that expressing doubt about the Blackwood arrangement only led to lectures about duty, security, and the importance of advantageous marriages. As she made her way downstairs, she found her father at the kitchen table, studying wanted posters and territorial law bulletins over his morning coffee. Sheriff Thornfield was an imposing man in his 50s, with graying hair and steel blue eyes that missed nothing. His presence commanded respect throughout the territory. "Morning, Papa," Elena said, kissing his weathered cheek. "Morning, daughter. I trust you'll conduct yourself appropriately at tea today. The Blackwoods are important allies, and this marriage will strengthen both our families' positions in the territory." Elena nodded, swallowing the questions that always seemed to rise in her throat. What about love? What about choosing her own path? What about happiness? But she had learned that such questions were not welcome in the Thornfield household. The morning passed quietly as Elena helped her mother with household tasks and prepared for the afternoon's social obligation. It was around noon when the routine of her carefully ordered life began to unravel. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, came rushing into the general store where Elena was purchasing ribbon for her dress repairs. The older woman was flustered and speaking rapidly to anyone who would listen. "My prize bull has broken loose again. That Ferdinand is halfway to the Mitchell Ranch by now, and with this storm coming in, I'll never get him back before he causes more damage. Sheriff Thornfield is out on patrol, and I don't know what to do." Elena found herself speaking before she fully considered her words. "I could ride out and help bring Ferdinand back, Mrs. Henderson. I know the way to the Mitchell Ranch." The older woman looked surprised. "Oh, my dear, that's very kind, but it wouldn't be proper for the sheriff's daughter to go chasing cattle. Besides, it looks like we're in for quite a storm." Elena glanced outside and saw dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind was picking up, and there was definitely rain coming. But something inside her rebelled against the idea of staying safely indoors while there was a problem to be solved. "I'll be careful," Elena insisted, "and I'll take the covered buggy. I can handle Ferdinand. I've helped with cattle before." This was partially true. Elena had occasionally helped with ranch work during community barn raisings and harvest celebrations, though always under careful supervision and never anything that might be considered improper for a young lady of her station. Mrs. Henderson looked uncertain, but the prospect of losing her valuable bull was clearly weighing on her mind. "Well, if you're sure, the Mitchell Ranch is about 5 miles southwest. Young Sam Mitchell is probably there. He's helped me with Ferdinand before. Honest boy, even if he is just a small rancher." Elena's heart skipped slightly at the mention of Sam Mitchell. She had seen him around town occasionally. A tall, quiet man about 26 years old who worked a modest cattle ranch on the outskirts of the territory. He sometimes helped her father track missing livestock or provided information about suspicious strangers passing through the area. There was something about his steady presence and thoughtful manner that had always intrigued her, though she had never had occasion to speak with him directly. "I'll find him," Elena said, already moving toward the door. "Don't worry, Mrs. Henderson. We'll get Ferdinand back safely." As Elena hitched up the buggy and set out toward the Mitchell Ranch, she felt a strange sense of excitement mixed with nervousness. For the first time in months, she was doing something unplanned, something that wasn't part of her carefully structured routine. The wind was getting stronger, and she could smell rain in the air. But instead of turning back, she urged the horse forward. The Mitchell Ranch lay in a valley surrounded by rolling hills covered with spring grass. As Elena's buggy crested the final hill, she could see a modest wooden house, a barn, and several corrals where cattle grazed peacefully. It was simple but well-maintained, with none of the grand pretensions of the Blackwood estate, but possessing an honest, working beauty that appealed to something deep in Elena's heart. She was scanning the property for signs of Ferdinand when the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, the drops became a downpour, and Elena realized she was in trouble. The dirt road was rapidly turning to mud, and her horse was becoming skittish in the storm. As she tried to guide the buggy toward the shelter of the ranch buildings, disaster struck. The left wheel hit a hidden rock, the buggy lurched violently to one side, and Elena heard the unmistakable crack of breaking wood. The wheel collapsed completely, sending the buggy crashing onto its side and throwing Elena into the mud. For a moment she lay stunned, rain pouring down on her face, and her heart pounding with shock. Her ankle throbbed painfully, and she could see that the buggy was badly damaged. Worse yet, her horse had broken free and was galloping back toward town, leaving her stranded miles from home in the middle of a fierce storm. As the reality of her situation began to sink in, Elena heard the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Through the rain, she saw a rider approaching at full speed, a man on a powerful bay horse, riding with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life in the saddle. Sam Mitchell pulled up beside the wrecked buggy and immediately dismounted, his face creased with concern. "Miss Thornfield, are you hurt?" Elena tried to sit up and immediately gasped as pain shot through her ankle. I think I've twisted my ankle, and the buggy is—" "Don't worry about the buggy," Sam said, kneeling beside her in the mud without any regard for his clean clothes. "Can you put weight on that foot?" Elena attempted to stand, but nearly collapsed as her ankle refused to support her. Sam immediately caught her arm to steady her, and she found herself looking into the most honest, concerned eyes she had ever seen. They were brown with flecks of gold, and there was a depth of character in them that made her suddenly understand why her father trusted this man's word. "I was looking for Mrs. Henderson's bull," Elena explained, feeling foolish as the rain continued to soak through her dress. "Ferdinand broke loose again, and I thought I could help." Sam's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Ferdinand's in my south pasture, safe and sound. I was planning to bring him back to town after the storm passed, but right now we need to get you somewhere warm and dry before you catch pneumonia." Without waiting for her response, Sam scooped Elena up in his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. The casual strength of his embrace and the woodsy scent of his clothes sent an unexpected warmth through her, despite the cold rain. As he carried her toward his house, Elena was acutely aware of the solid steadiness of his heartbeat and the gentle way he held her. "I should get back to town," Elena protested weakly. "My parents will be worried, and I'm supposed to have tea with—" "Miss Thornfield," Sam said firmly, "this storm isn't going to let up for hours. Your buggy isn't going anywhere, and you need to get that ankle looked at. Your father would have my hide if I let anything happen to you." As they reached the covered porch of his house, Sam set Elena down gently in a wooden chair and quickly disappeared inside. He returned moments later with a thick wool blanket and a clean towel. "Here," he said, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "Let me take a look at that ankle." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks as Sam knelt before her and carefully examined her injured foot through her torn stocking. His touch was gentle but professional, like someone who had dealt with injuries before. "It's not broken," he announced after a moment. "Just a bad sprain, but you'll need to stay off it for the rest of today." "I can't stay here," Elena said, though her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "It wouldn't be proper." Sam looked up at her with those steady brown eyes. "Miss Thornfield, there's a storm raging outside that's likely to last until evening. Your buggy is broken, your horse has run off, and you can barely walk. Sometimes being proper takes second place to being safe." As if to emphasize his point, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, followed by a lightning flash that illuminated the darkened sky. Elena realized that Sam was absolutely right. She wasn't going anywhere until the storm passed. "All right," she said quietly, "but I should send word to my parents somehow." "I'll ride into town as soon as it's safe and let your father know you're here," Sam promised. "For now, let's get you inside where it's warm." Sam's house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with books. More books than Elena had expected to find in a rancher's home. As Sam helped her to a chair near the fire and went to prepare coffee, Elena found herself studying her surroundings with curiosity. The books ranged from practical volumes on cattle ranching and veterinary care to collections of poetry, histories, and even a few novels. A half-finished letter lay on the desk, written in clear, educated handwriting. This was clearly the home of a man who thought about more than just cattle and horses. "You seem surprised," Sam said, returning with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He had noticed her examining his bookshelf. "I didn't expect—" Elena stopped herself, realizing how condescending her observation might sound. "You didn't expect a cowboy to read?" Sam asked with gentle amusement. "My mother was a schoolteacher back in Missouri. She made sure I had a proper education before I came west to start the ranch." "I'm sorry," Elena said, feeling her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to assume—" "No offense taken," Sam assured her. "Most people see the work clothes and the cattle and figure that's all there is. Your father's one of the few who's taken the time to know me better." As they sat by the fire waiting for the storm to pass, Elena found herself drawn into the most interesting conversation she had had in months. Sam asked her about her own reading, her thoughts on the growing territory, her observations about the changes happening in Silverbrook. He listened to her answers with genuine interest, never once making her feel that her opinions were less valuable because she was a woman. "Do you ever think about leaving?" Elena found herself asking. "Going somewhere else? Starting over?" Sam was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Sometimes," he admitted, "there are places where a man can start with nothing and build something real. California, Oregon Territory, maybe even Alaska. But this land gets into your blood, and there are reasons to stay." Something in his tone made Elena look at him more closely, and she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite identify. There was warmth there, and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. "What about you?" Sam asked. "Do you ever think about what you'd do if you could choose any life you wanted?" Elena was surprised by the question. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. Her life had always been a matter of what was expected, what was proper, what would best serve her family's interests. She began, then stopped. How could she explain that sometimes she lay awake at night, dreaming of traveling to distant places, of writing letters for newspapers the way some women were starting to do, of making choices based on her own heart rather than social expectations. "I think I'd like to see the ocean," she said finally. "And maybe I'd like to help people. Real help, not just charity work and social calls." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "You'd be good at that. You've got a kind heart and a strong will. That's a powerful combination." Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a warm, unfamiliar feeling that seemed to spread through her entire being. When was the last time someone had spoken to her about her character, her potential, rather than her suitability as a wife or her value as a social alliance? As the afternoon wore on and the storm continued to rage outside, Elena found herself forgetting about tea with Mrs. Blackwood, forgetting about her role as the sheriff's daughter, forgetting about everything except the pleasure of talking with someone who saw her as a complete person rather than a pretty ornament. Sam told her about his plans for expanding the ranch, his hopes for breeding better cattle, his dreams of maybe one day owning enough land to make a real difference in the territory's development. Elena shared her observations about the people of Silverbrook, her concerns about some of the mining practices she had overheard her father discussing, her secret wish to learn more about the law so she could better understand her father's work. It was nearly sunset when the storm finally began to subside. Sam had been checking the weather regularly, and as the rain softened to a gentle drizzle, he announced that it would soon be safe for him to ride to town. "I'll let your father know you're safe," he said, reaching for his coat. "And I'll arrange for someone to come fix your buggy tomorrow." "Sam," Elena said, stopping him at the door. "Thank you for everything. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Sam turned back to her, and for a moment, Elena thought he was going to say something important. But instead, he simply nodded and said, "Take care of that ankle, Miss Thornfield. And don't worry about Ferdinand. I'll get him back to Mrs. Henderson." As Sam disappeared into the gathering dusk, Elena sat alone in his house and realized that something fundamental had changed. She had spent one afternoon talking with Sam Mitchell, and somehow her entire understanding of what her life could be had shifted. For the first time, she had glimpsed what it might feel like to be truly seen, truly valued, truly understood. And the knowledge that such a connection was possible made the prospect of her arranged marriage to William Blackwood seem not just undesirable, but absolutely impossible. When Sheriff Thornfield arrived an hour later to collect his daughter, he found Elena quiet and thoughtful. She answered his questions about the accident appropriately, thanked him for his concern, and allowed him to help her into his wagon without complaint. But as they rode back toward town, Elena kept turning to look back at the simple ranch house where Sam Mitchell lived alone with his books and his dreams and his unexpected understanding of who she really was underneath all the expectations and proprieties. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment when Elena Thornfield began to fall in love. Not with a suitable husband or a social alliance, but with the possibility of choosing her own happiness, even if it meant defying everything she had been taught about duty and obligation. The storm had passed, but a much more dangerous tempest was just beginning to brew in the young woman's heart. The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of confusion and longing that Elena had never experienced before. Outwardly, she maintained her usual routine, helping her mother with household duties, attending church services, participating in the social activities expected of the sheriff's daughter. But inwardly, she found herself constantly thinking about her afternoon at Sam Mitchell's ranch. Every time she closed her eyes, she could recall perfectly the sound of his voice as he talked about his dreams for the future, the gentle strength of his hands as he examined her injured ankle, the way his brown eyes had focused on her face when she spoke, as if her words were the most important things he had ever heard. The contrast between that memory and her current reality was becoming unbearable. "Elena, dear, you seem distracted lately," her mother observed one morning as they prepared bread for baking. "Is everything all right? You're not having second thoughts about William, are you?" Elena forced herself to focus on kneading the dough. "Of course not, Mother. I'm just thinking about the engagement party preparations." This was partially true. The Blackwood family had indeed been pressing forward with plans for an elaborate engagement celebration, scheduled for the following month. William had been calling on Elena regularly, bringing flowers and small gifts, discussing their future home and the social events they would host as a married couple. But every conversation with William only served to highlight how different he was from Sam Mitchell. Where Sam listened, William lectured. Where Sam asked for her opinions, William informed her of decisions he had already made. Where Sam treated her as an equal, William clearly viewed her as an attractive accessory to his successful life. The Blackwoods are such a fine family, Margaret continued. William will be able to provide you with everything you could possibly want. A beautiful home, the finest clothes, security for your children. Elena nodded automatically, but her heart rebelled against the list of material advantages. What about conversation that challenged her mind? What about someone who saw her dreams as worthy of discussion? What about the feeling of being truly understood? I'm going to walk to the general store for ribbon, Elena announced, untying her apron. We need thread for my dress alterations. What she really needed was fresh air and time to think without her mother's well-meaning but suffocating commentary about her advantageous future. The walk to town took Elena past the sheriff's office, where she could see her father through the window, discussing something serious with two territorial officials. Sheriff Thornfield had been working longer hours lately, dealing with increased mining disputes and concerns about claim jumpers in the outer areas of the territory. As Elena continued down Main Street, she was surprised to see Sam Mitchell tying his horse outside the general store. Her heart immediately began beating faster, and she found herself checking her appearance in the reflection of a shop window. Miss Thornfield, Sam said, tipping his hat as she approached. How's that ankle healing? Much better, thank you, Elena replied, acutely aware that they were standing in the middle of the town's busiest street, where anyone might observe their conversation. Are you in town on business? Picking up supplies, Sam confirmed. And I wanted to check with your father about some suspicious characters I spotted near the boundary of my property yesterday. Looked like they might be claim jumpers or worse. Elena felt a small thrill at this reminder that Sam worked closely with her father on law enforcement matters. It made their acquaintance seem more legitimate, more acceptable. Papa's in his office now, she said. I'm sure he'd want to hear about anything suspicious. Sam nodded, but instead of immediately heading toward the sheriff's office, he seemed to hesitate. Miss Thornfield, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem different today. Troubled, maybe. Elena was startled by his perceptiveness. Oh, I'm fine. Just thinking about various things. Sometimes it helps to talk through whatever's troubling you, Sam said gently. If you ever need someone to listen without judgment, I hope you know you can count on me. Before Elena could respond, she heard her name being called from across the street. William Blackwood was approaching, dressed in his usual fine suit and carrying a bouquet of expensive hothouse flowers. Elena, darling, William said, completely ignoring Sam's presence. I was hoping to find you. Mother wanted me to confirm the guest list for our engagement party. Elena felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment at William's possessive tone and his deliberate rudeness toward Sam. William, I'd like you to meet Sam Mitchell. He owns the ranch south of town. William barely glanced at Sam before turning his attention back to Elena. Yes, well, we really must discuss these party details. Shall we go somewhere more private? Sam's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained polite. Good to meet you, Mr. Blackwood. Miss Thornfield, I'll let you attend to your business. Sheriff Thornfield is expecting my report. As Sam walked away toward the sheriff's office, Elena felt a terrible sense of loss. The brief moment of connection they had shared was broken, replaced by William's overwhelming presence and assumption of ownership over her time and attention. Who exactly is that man? William asked, watching Sam's retreating figure with obvious displeasure. I don't like the way he was looking at you. He's a rancher who sometimes helps Papa with law enforcement matters, Elena said carefully. He was kind enough to help me when my buggy broke down during the storm last week. William's expression darkened. I don't recall hearing about any accident. Were you injured? You should have sent for me immediately. Elena realized that her parents had apparently chosen not to share the details of her misadventure with William, probably to avoid any suggestion of impropriety. It was just a minor sprain, nothing serious. Still, I don't like the idea of you accepting help from some random cowboy, William said firmly. After we're married, I'll make sure you have proper escorts for any travel outside town. We can't have my wife wandering around the countryside unprotected. The casual way William spoke about controlling her movements after their marriage sent a chill through Elena. She had always known that wives were expected to defer to their husband's authority, but something about William's tone suggested a level of possessiveness that felt suffocating. "The flowers are lovely," Elena said, changing the subject to avoid further discussion of Sam or her future limitations. "Only the best for my bride," William replied, offering his arm. "Now, shall we review these party plans? Mother has some wonderful ideas for the decorations." As William escorted her toward the hotel dining room where they could discuss wedding preparations in privacy, Elena found herself looking back over her shoulder toward the sheriff's office. Through the window, she could see Sam in earnest conversation with her father, pointing at a map spread across the desk. There was something about Sam's confident posture and her father's attentive expression that reminded Elena of how much she respected men who contributed meaningfully to their community through honest work and genuine service. William, for all his wealth and social standing, had never struck her as someone who would risk his own comfort to help a neighbor or protect the community's welfare. The contrast was becoming more apparent every day, and Elena was beginning to understand that this was not just a matter of preference, but of fundamental character. Over the following week, Elena found herself paying attention to Sam's comings and goings around town with an intensity that both thrilled and worried her. She learned that he visited the sheriff's office regularly, always with useful information about activities in the outlying areas. She noticed that he stopped to help Mrs. Henderson repair a fence, that he delivered a lost calf to the pastor's family, that he always tipped his hat respectfully to the ladies and spoke kindly to the children. Most significantly, she observed that Sam treated everyone with the same genuine courtesy and respect, regardless of their social status or wealth. This was in stark contrast to William, who was charming to important people and dismissive toward anyone he considered beneath his notice. Elena was walking home from the church one evening after helping prepare for Sunday services when she encountered Sam leading Ferdinand back to Mrs. Henderson's property. The massive bull was being surprisingly cooperative, following Sam's gentle guidance without any of his usual stubbornness. "He seems to like you," Elena observed, stopping to watch the unlikely partnership. Sam chuckled. "Ferdinand and I have an understanding. I respect his independence, and he respects my determination. Eventually, we find a compromise." Elena found herself wondering if Sam approached all relationships with the same patient wisdom. "Mrs. Henderson says he's been much better behaved since you started helping with him. Sometimes an animal just needs someone to pay attention to what he's really trying to communicate," Sam said. "Ferdinand's not mean-spirited. He's just bored and looking for adventure. Can't say I blame him." There was something in Sam's tone that made Elena suspect he was talking about more than just Mrs. Henderson's bull. "Do you ever feel that way? Bored and looking for adventure?" Sam was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the soft evening light. "Sometimes, but lately I've been thinking that the most important adventures might be the ones that happen right here, if a person has the courage to recognize them." Elena felt her breath catch. There was definitely a deeper meaning in his words, and the way he was looking at her suggested that she was part of whatever adventure he was considering. "Sam," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "Elena," the sharp voice cut through the gentle evening air like a whip crack. Elena spun around to see her father striding toward them, his expression thunderous. "Papa," Elena said, her heart sinking as she realized how her conversation with Sam must appear to anyone observing from a distance. "Mr. Mitchell," Sheriff Thornfield said with icy politeness, "I wasn't expecting to find you entertaining my daughter in the middle of the street." "Sheriff Thornfield," Sam replied evenly. "I was returning Ferdinand to Mrs. Henderson and happened to encounter Miss Thornfield on her way home from church. We were simply exchanging pleasantries." Elena could see the tension in both men's postures and realized that this innocent encounter was about to escalate into something much more serious if she didn't act quickly. "Papa, Mr. Mitchell was telling me about Ferdinand's improved behavior," Elena said quickly. "Mrs. Henderson will be so pleased to hear that her bull is becoming more manageable." Sheriff Thornfield's sharp eyes moved between Elena and Sam, clearly assessing the situation for any signs of impropriety. "I see. Well, Mr. Mitchell, I'm sure Mrs. Henderson appreciates your assistance with her livestock. Elena, your mother is expecting you home." "Of course, Papa," Elena said obediently. "Good evening, Mr. Mitchell. Please give Mrs. Henderson my regards." As Elena walked home beside her father, she could feel the weight of his disapproval radiating from his rigid posture. Sheriff Thornfield was not a man who tolerated behavior that might reflect poorly on his family's reputation, and Elena knew that her innocent conversation with Sam had somehow crossed an invisible line. "Elena," her father said as they reached their front gate, "I want to make something very clear. Your engagement to William Blackwood is a matter of considerable importance to both our families and to the stability of this community. I will not tolerate any behavior that might jeopardize that arrangement." Elena felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. "Papa, I would never do anything to embarrass our family." "I'm sure you wouldn't intentionally," Sheriff Thornfield said, "but young women sometimes fail to understand how their actions might be interpreted by others. Casual conversations with unmarried men, particularly men of questionable social standing, can easily be misconstrued as encouragement or impropriety." "Sam Mitchell is hardly of questionable social standing," Elena protested. "He's an honest rancher who helps you with law enforcement work." "Sam Mitchell," her father said firmly, "is a decent enough man within his proper sphere, but he is not, and never will be, an appropriate companion for the sheriff's daughter. You have obligations and responsibilities that extend far beyond your personal preferences." That night, Elena lay in bed staring at the ceiling and trying to understand exactly when her life had become a cage. Every rule, every expectation, every social obligation seemed designed to prevent her from making any meaningful choices about her own future. She thought about Sam's words regarding Ferdinand. Sometimes an animal just needs someone to pay attention to what he's really trying to communicate. What was she trying to communicate? And why did it feel like no one in her life was interested in listening? The next morning brought an unwelcome surprise. Elena was helping her mother prepare breakfast when William Blackwood arrived unexpectedly, carrying a small velvet box and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Elena, darling," William announced, "I couldn't wait any longer. I have something very special for you." Inside the velvet box was an enormous diamond ring surrounded by smaller stones, clearly expensive and undeniably impressive. It was also the most ostentatious piece of jewelry Elena had ever seen, designed more to display William's wealth than to reflect any understanding of her personal taste. "It belonged to my grandmother," William said, sliding the ring onto Elena's finger without asking for her consent. "Every Blackwood bride has worn it. Now it's yours." Elena stared at the heavy ring, feeling its weight like a chain around her finger. The diamond caught the morning light and threw sparkles across the kitchen wall, but instead of feeling joy or excitement, Elena felt only a growing sense of panic. It's very beautiful," she managed to say. "The most beautiful ring for the most beautiful bride in the territory," William declared, lifting her hand to kiss the ring. "Now everyone will know that you belong to me." The word belong hit Elena like a physical blow. She belonged to herself, didn't she? When had her engagement to William become a transfer of ownership rather than a partnership between equals? "When shall we announce the engagement officially?" William continued. "I was thinking we could place a notice in the territorial newspaper and perhaps host a reception next month." Elena realized that events were moving faster than she had anticipated. Once their engagement was officially announced, backing out would be nearly impossible without causing a tremendous scandal that would reflect poorly on both families. "Perhaps we should wait a bit longer," Elena said carefully, "until after the spring cattle drives are finished and everyone can attend properly." William frowned. "Darling, I see no reason to delay. My business affairs are progressing wonderfully, and I'm eager for everyone to know about our upcoming marriage. Surely you're not having second thoughts?" There was something in William's tone that suggested second thoughts would not be welcome or acceptable. Elena realized that she was being presented with a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. "Of course not," she said, forcing a smile. "I just want everything to be perfect." "It will be," William assured her, squeezing her hand in a way that made the heavy ring press uncomfortably against her finger. "I'll take care of everything. You don't need to worry about any of the details." As William left to begin making arrangements for their official engagement announcement, Elena sat at the kitchen table and stared at the diamond ring. It was beautiful, valuable, and completely wrong for her in every possible way. More importantly, she realized that wearing it felt like betraying something essential about herself, something she had only just begun to discover during her conversations with Sam Mitchell. That afternoon, Elena made a decision that would change the course of her life forever. She waited until her parents were both occupied with their respective duties, then quietly slipped out of the house and walked toward the edge of town. She told herself she was simply taking a walk to clear her head, but her feet carried her steadily in the direction of the Mitchell Ranch. She needed to see Sam again, to talk with someone who understood that there were choices beyond the ones being presented to her. What she didn't know was that someone had observed her departure from town and would soon carry word of her destination back to people who would not view her afternoon walk as innocent exercise. Elena was about to discover that in a small frontier town, every action had consequences, and some choices could never be undone. Elena's walk to the Mitchell Ranch that afternoon marked the beginning of the most dangerous and exhilarating period of her life. As she approached Sam's property, she could see him working in one of the corrals, training a young horse with the same patient persistence she had witnessed with Ferdinand. Sam looked up as she approached and immediately set aside his work, his face showing surprise mixed with unmistakable pleasure at seeing her. "Miss Thornfield," he said, removing his hat. "This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" Elena realized she hadn't prepared any reasonable explanation for her appearance at his ranch. I was walking and thought I should thank you properly for helping Mrs. Henderson with Ferdinand. She's been telling everyone how grateful she is." It was a weak excuse, and Sam's thoughtful expression suggested he knew there was more to her visit than gratitude for bullsitting services. But he was too much of a gentleman to question her motives. "Would you like some coffee?" Sam offered. "I just put a fresh pot on." Elena knew she should decline and return home immediately, but something about Sam's genuine warmth and the peaceful atmosphere of his ranch made her nod acceptance. "That would be lovely, thank you." As they sat on Sam's front porch, watching the late afternoon sun paint the surrounding hills in shades of gold and amber, Elena felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in weeks. Here, away from the expectations and obligations that seemed to define every moment of her life in town, she could simply exist as herself. "You seem troubled," Sam observed quietly, handing her a steaming cup. "If you don't mind me saying so." Elena looked down at her hands wrapped around the warm coffee cup, noticing how the diamond engagement ring caught the light. She had forgotten she was wearing it until this moment. "I suppose I am troubled," Elena admitted. "Sometimes I feel like my life is happening to me, rather than being something I'm actively choosing." Sam followed her gaze to the ring, and his expression grew serious. "That's a beautiful ring," he said carefully. "Recent." "This morning," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "William surprised me with it. Apparently, we're announcing our engagement officially very soon." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Sam stared out at the horizon, his jaw tight with what might have been disappointment or frustration or both. "Congratulations," he finally said, though the words seemed to cost him considerable effort. "Sam," Elena said impulsively, "do you think it's possible for someone to make the wrong choice about their entire life, even if it's the choice everyone expects them to make?" Sam turned to look at her directly, and Elena saw something in his brown eyes that made her heart race. Pain, longing, and a depth of feeling that he was clearly struggling to control. "I think," Sam said slowly, "that a person has to live with the consequences of their choices for the rest of their life. So those choices should be made by the person who has to live with them, not by everyone else who thinks they know what's best." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "But what if making the choice you want would hurt people you love? What if it would disappoint everyone who's counting on you? What if making the choice everyone else wants destroys the person you're meant to be?" Sam countered gently. They sat in silence for several minutes, both apparently lost in contemplation of choices and consequences and the weight of expectations. Finally, Sam spoke again. "Elena," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I need to say something, and then I'll never speak of it again if that's what you want." Elena's heart began pounding so hard she was certain Sam could hear it. "What is it?" "I think about you," Sam said simply. "More than I should, more than I have any right to. I think about your laugh and the way you listen when someone's talking and how your eyes light up when you're discussing something that matters to you. I think about what it would be like to build a life with someone who sees the world the way you do. Elena felt as if the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. No one had ever spoken to her with such honesty about feelings, about the possibility of partnership built on genuine understanding rather than social advantage. I think about you too, Elena whispered, barely able to believe she was saying the words aloud. I think about how different everything feels when I'm talking with you. How I feel like myself instead of like the person everyone expects me to be. Sam reached out slowly and covered her hand with his. Even through her gloves, Elena could feel the calluses on his palms from years of honest work and the gentle strength that seemed to characterize everything about him. I don't have much to offer, Sam said. Just a small ranch, a lot of hard work, and the promise that I would spend every day trying to make you happy. But I can't offer you the security and status that William Blackwood can provide. Elena looked down at their joined hands, her soft, pale fingers intertwined with his work-roughened ones, and realized that this simple contact felt more right than all of William's expensive gifts and grand promises. What if I don't want security and status? Elena asked. What if I want partnership and understanding and the chance to build something real with someone who values my mind as much as my appearance? Sam's grip on her hand tightened. Then I would say that such a woman deserves to have exactly what she wants, regardless of what anyone else thinks she should choose. Elena knew that what was happening between them was dangerous, possibly destructive to both their futures. But she also knew that this moment of honest connection was the most real thing she had experienced in her 22 years of life. I should go, Elena said reluctantly. People will be wondering where I am. I know, Sam agreed, but neither of them moved to break the connection between them. Sam, Elena said finally, would it be terribly improper if I came to visit again? Just to talk? Sam was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the risks against his own desires. It would be improper, he said finally, and potentially dangerous for both of us. But I can't bring myself to say I don't want you to come. Elena nodded, understanding that they were acknowledging the beginning of something that could never be openly discussed or officially sanctioned. Then I'll find reasons to walk in this direction occasionally, for the fresh air and exercise. And I'll make sure to have coffee ready, Sam said with a slight smile. Just in case. As Elena walked back toward town, she felt as if she were living in two completely different worlds. In one world, she was the dutiful sheriff's daughter, engaged to the territory's most eligible bachelor, preparing for a life of social obligations and material comfort. In the other world, she was a woman discovering what it felt like to be truly seen and valued by someone who asked nothing of her except her authentic self. Over the next 3 weeks, Elena found herself making regular afternoon walks that somehow always led her past the Mitchell Ranch. Sometimes Sam was working in the fields and would wave from a distance. Sometimes he was near the house and would invite her for coffee and conversation. Always she felt more like herself during those stolen hours than she did during the rest of her carefully structured days. Their conversations ranged across topics that Elena had never been encouraged to discuss in polite society. Sam asked her opinions about territorial politics, about the ethics of mining practices, about her observations of human nature from her unique position as the sheriff's daughter. In return, he shared his dreams of expanding his ranch, his thoughts about sustainable farming practices, his quiet philosophy about treating both animals and people with respect and dignity. Elena began to understand that intelligence and wisdom had nothing to do with formal education or social status. Sam possessed a depth of understanding about life, relationships, and moral principles that far exceeded anything she had encountered in the supposedly sophisticated circles where her family socialized. More dangerously, she was falling in love, not with the romantic fantasy of love that young women were supposed to cherish, but with the reality of daily companionship with someone who challenged her thinking, supported her dreams, and made her believe that marriage could be a true partnership between equals. The contrast with her interactions with William became increasingly unbearable. Where Sam listened, William lectured. Where Sam asked for her thoughts, William informed her of conclusions he had already reached. Where Sam treated her as a capable adult, William seemed to view her as a beautiful child who needed constant guidance and protection. "I've been thinking about our wedding," William announced during one of his regular visits, spreading architectural drawings across the Thornfield dining table. "These are plans for the house I'm having built for us. Mother helped me choose all the details since you've been so busy with other things." Elena stared at the elaborate plans for a mansion that would have looked more at home in Boston or Philadelphia than in Frontier, Colorado. Every room was designed for formal entertainment and social display, with no consideration for comfort, practicality, or personal preference. "It's very grand," Elena said carefully. "Only the best for my bride," William declared. "I want everyone in the territory to know that the Blackwoods spare no expense for family. This will be the finest house between Denver and Salt Lake City." Elena noticed that William had said the Blackwoods rather than the Blackwood family or our family. It was a small detail, but it reinforced her growing understanding that William viewed their marriage primarily as an expansion of Blackwood property and influence rather than the creation of a new partnership. "What about the kitchen?" Elena asked, studying the plans. "It seems quite small for such a large house." William waved dismissively. "We'll have plenty of servants to handle cooking and cleaning. You won't need to concern yourself with such mundane matters. Your role will be to oversee the social aspects of our household and to represent the Blackwood name appropriately in community affairs." Elena felt a chill at William's casual assumption that she would be content to live as an ornamental figurehead in her own home. "But I enjoy cooking, and I'd like to have some say in how my household is managed." "Darling," William said with patronizing patience, "you'll have far more important things to occupy your time. Mother is already planning a series of social events where you can establish yourself as the territory's premier hostess. We'll be entertaining investors, territorial officials, prominent families from Denver, people who can help advance both our interests and your father's career." Elena realized that William's vision of their marriage involved using her social position to further his business ambitions and political connections. She would become a tool for networking and advancement rather than a partner in building a meaningful life together. That evening, as Elena lay in bed staring at the heavy engagement ring on her finger, she found herself imagining a different conversation about the future. In her imagination, she and Sam were sitting on his front porch, discussing plans for expanding the ranch. Sam was asking for her ideas about which crops might grow well in their climate, whether they should focus on cattle or horses, how they could contribute to the community's development while building something sustainable for themselves. In her imaginary conversation, Sam valued her intelligence and creativity. He wanted her partnership in making important decisions rather than expecting her to simply smile and look beautiful while he made all the choices. He saw their potential marriage as the joining of two equals who would work together to build something meaningful. Elena knew that her fantasy was dangerous and probably impossible, but she also knew that she had glimpsed what marriage could be with the right person, and that knowledge made settling for less seem like a betrayal of everything she was meant to become. The crisis came sooner than Elena had anticipated. She was returning from another afternoon visit with Sam, walking along the main road toward town, when she encountered Mrs. Blackwood's carriage heading in the opposite direction. "Elena, dear," William's mother called, signaling her driver to stop. "What a surprise to see you walking so far from town. Have you been visiting someone?" Elena's heart sank as she realized that Mrs. Blackwood's sharp eyes were taking note of every detail. Elena's slightly windblown hair, the direction from which she was walking, the faint scent of wood smoke from Sam's fireplace that probably clung to her clothes. "I was just taking some exercise," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The afternoon was so beautiful. I walked farther than I intended." "Of course," Mrs. Blackwood said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "though you do want to be careful about walking alone in isolated areas. There are all sorts of unsavory characters living in the outlying regions. Perhaps in the future you should take a companion or stay closer to town." Elena understood the warning beneath Mrs. Blackwood's polite words. William's mother suspected something, and Elena's afternoon walks were now under scrutiny. "You're absolutely right," Elena agreed. "I'll be more careful in the future." As Mrs. Blackwood's carriage continued toward town, Elena realized that her secret visits to Sam were probably over. The risk of discovery, and the scandal that would follow, was too great for both of them. But as she walked the final mile home, Elena also realized that 3 weeks of honest conversation and genuine connection with Sam had changed her fundamentally. She now understood what she wanted from life, and more importantly, what she was unwilling to accept. The question was whether she would have the courage to act on that understanding when the time came to make an irreversible choice. That night, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself. She carefully removed William's engagement ring and placed it in her jewelry box. Tomorrow she would have to put it back on and continue playing the role of the dutiful fiancé. But tonight, she wanted to sleep with her hands free of symbols of obligation she had never truly accepted. Outside her window, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Elena fell asleep to the sound of distant thunder, not knowing that the emotional storm brewing in her own life would soon prove far more dangerous than any weather the Colorado Territory had ever seen. Elena managed to avoid suspicion for exactly 4 days after her encounter with Mrs. Blackwood. She resumed her normal routine, attended social obligations with appropriate enthusiasm, and made sure to wear William's engagement ring during all public appearances. But the effort of pretending contentment with her arranged future was becoming exhausting. On Thursday morning, Elena was helping her mother prepare for a church social when Sheriff Thornfield entered the kitchen with an expression that made both women freeze with apprehension. "Elena," her father said in the carefully controlled tone he used when dispensing serious discipline, "I need to speak with you, privately." Elena's heart began racing, but she followed her father into his study and closed the door behind them. Sheriff Thornfield positioned himself behind his desk, every inch the territorial lawman preparing to interrogate a suspect. "Sit down," he commanded. Elena obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. "I've received some disturbing information," Sheriff Thornfield began, his steel blue eyes fixed on his daughter's face. "Information that suggests you've been conducting yourself in a manner unbecoming to both your station and your engagement to William Blackwood." Elena forced herself to meet her father's gaze steadily. "I don't understand what you mean, Papa." "Don't compound your poor judgment with dishonesty," Sheriff Thornfield said sharply. "Mrs. Blackwood spoke with me yesterday. She's concerned about reports that you've been seen walking alone in the direction of the Mitchell Ranch on multiple occasions." Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she tried to maintain her composure. "I enjoy taking walks for exercise. There's nothing improper about that. There is something improper about an engaged young woman repeatedly visiting the property of an unmarried man," her father replied, "particularly when those visits are conducted in secret and without the knowledge or approval of her family." Elena realized that denial was pointless. Someone had obviously been watching her movements and reporting back to the Blackwood family. "I haven't done anything wrong, Papa. Mr. Mitchell has been perfectly respectful." "The issue isn't Mr. Mitchell's behavior," Sheriff Thornfield said coldly. "The issue is your judgment. You are engaged to be married to one of the territory's most prominent citizens. Your actions reflect not only on yourself and this family, but on William and his family as well. I will not allow you to jeopardize that relationship through inappropriate conduct." Elena felt a surge of rebellious anger that surprised her with its intensity. What exactly is inappropriate about having conversations with someone who treats me as an intelligent person rather than a decorative object? Sheriff Thornfield's face darkened at his daughter's defiant tone. "Your role is not to be treated as anything other than what you are, a young woman of good family who has been fortunate enough to secure an advantageous marriage. Your personal feelings about that arrangement are irrelevant." "How can my feelings about my own marriage be irrelevant?" Elena demanded, rising from her chair. "I'm the one who will have to live with the consequences of this choice for the rest of my life." "You will live with the consequences of the choice your family has made for you," Sheriff Thornfield corrected firmly. "A choice based on practical considerations that you are apparently too young and foolish to appreciate." Elena stared at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. Sheriff Joshua Thornfield was a man who valued order, control, and social stability above individual happiness or personal freedom. The law he enforced was rigid and unforgiving, with no room for exceptions based on human feelings or circumstances. "What if I refuse?" Elena asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them like a challenge that could never be taken back. Sheriff Thornfield stood slowly, his impressive height and stern bearing designed to intimidate. "You will not refuse. You will marry William Blackwood as planned, You will conduct yourself appropriately until that marriage takes place, and you will never again engage in behavior that brings shame to this family. And if I choose not to comply with your orders, Elena asked, surprised by her own courage, then you will discover that defying your father has consequences you are not prepared to face, Sheriff Thornfield said with ominous certainty. You have been sheltered and protected your entire life, Elena. You have no idea what the world is like for young women who find themselves without family support or social standing. I suggest you consider that reality very carefully before making any decisions you might regret. Elena understood the threat implicit in her father's words. If she defied him, she would be cut off from her family, her inheritance, and her social position. She would become a pariah in the only community she had ever known, with no resources and no prospects for a respectable future. But as she looked at her father's implacable expression, Elena also understood that accepting his terms meant accepting a life of complete submission to other people's choices about her identity, her relationships, and her happiness. I need time to think, Elena said finally. You have until Sunday, Sheriff Thornfield replied. The engagement announcement will be published in Monday's territorial newspaper. If you attempt to embarrass this family or the Blackwood family by creating any kind of scene or disruption, I will make sure that Sam Mitchell faces legal consequences for his inappropriate pursuit of an engaged woman. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Sam hasn't pursued me inappropriately. Our conversations have been completely innocent. Innocent or not, a territorial court would view his conduct as improper interference with another man's intended bride, Sheriff Thornfield said coldly. Mr. Mitchell's ranch depends on territorial land grants that could easily be revoked if questions arose about his character and judgment. I would hate to see him lose everything because of your poor decisions. Elena realized that her father was threatening to destroy Sam's livelihood and future if she refused to comply with the marriage arrangement. Sheriff Thornfield held considerable influence with territorial officials, and Elena had no doubt that he would follow through on his threat if necessary. Do I make myself clear? Sheriff Thornfield asked. Yes, Papa, Elena whispered, feeling as if her entire world was collapsing around her. Good. Now go help your mother with the church social preparations. And Elena, if you attempt to contact Sam Mitchell in any way, I will consider that a violation of our agreement. Elena left her father's study feeling numb with shock and despair. In the space of one conversation, every choice had been taken away from her. She could submit to marriage with William Blackwood, or she could watch her father destroy the man she loved. It wasn't really a choice at all. The next 3 days passed in a blur of wedding preparations and social obligations that felt surreal and nightmarish. Elena smiled when expected, nodded when spoken to, and participated in discussions about flowers, menus, and guest lists with a mechanical politeness that fooled everyone except her mother. Elena, dear, you seem rather subdued lately, Margaret Thornfield observed on Saturday evening as they prepared for Sunday services. Pre-wedding nerves are perfectly natural, but you've been so quiet since Thursday. Elena forced herself to focus on arranging her hair properly. I'm just overwhelmed by all the preparations, Mother. Everything is happening so quickly. Perhaps that's for the best, Margaret said gently. Sometimes it's easier to simply move forward than to spend too much time thinking about major life changes. Elena wondered if her mother had any idea how prophetic those words were. Elena had indeed been thinking about major life changes, and the more she thought, the more unbearable her situation became. William had been more attentive than ever during the past few days, apparently excited about the upcoming official announcement of their engagement. He brought Elena gifts daily, discussed their wedding plans with increasing enthusiasm, and spoke constantly about the social events they would host as a married couple. I've arranged for a photographer to come from Denver for our engagement portrait, William announced on Saturday afternoon. The photograph will accompany the newspaper announcement. I want everyone to see what a beautiful bride I've secured. Elena nodded appropriately, but William's language continued to disturb her. He spoke about securing her as if she were a business acquisition rather than a person. He displayed her like a trophy rather than treating her as a partner. Every interaction reinforced Elena's understanding that William viewed their marriage as a successful negotiation rather than a romantic partnership. That Saturday night, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine her life 10 years in the future. She saw herself hosting elaborate dinner parties for William's business associates, managing a household run by servants, raising children who would be shaped primarily by their father's ambitions and expectations. She saw herself growing older and more bitter as her intelligence and creativity were slowly suffocated by social obligations and meaningless rituals. Most painfully, she imagined Sam Mitchell building his ranch alone, perhaps eventually marrying some other woman who would appreciate his kindness and integrity. She pictured him sitting on his front porch with a wife who shared his dreams and valued his wisdom, raising children who would learn honesty and hard work from their father's example. The contrast between those two futures was unbearable. Sunday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Elena's mood perfectly. She dressed carefully for church services, knowing that this would be one of her last appearances before the official engagement announcement made her situation irreversible. As the Thornfield family took their usual pew near the front of the church, Elena noticed Sam Mitchell sitting toward the back with several other ranchers. Her heart ached at the sight of him, knowing that she would probably never again have the opportunity for honest conversation with the man who had shown her what her life could be with the right partner. During the service, Elena found herself praying desperately for wisdom, courage, or divine intervention, anything that might provide a solution to her impossible situation. But the only answer that came to her was the terrible certainty that she would have to choose between her own happiness and Sam's welfare. After services, as the congregation gathered outside to socialize, Elena saw Sam approaching her family. Her heart began racing as she realized he was going to speak with her father in a public setting where she couldn't warn him about the threats that had been made. "Sheriff Thornfield," Sam said respectfully, tipping his hat, "I wonder if I might have a word with you about the situation with those claim jumpers I reported last week." Elena watched her father's face carefully, searching for any sign of the hostility she knew he felt toward Sam. But Sheriff Thornfield's expression remained professionally neutral. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell. Has there been further activity in that area?" "Yes, sir. I've seen evidence of illegal mining operations on territorial land adjacent to my property. I think it warrants official investigation." As Sam and her father discussed law enforcement matters, Elena found herself studying Sam's face and posture. He appeared calm and confident, completely unaware that his future hung in the balance based on Elena's compliance with her family's demands. The conversation concluded with Sheriff Thornfield agreeing to investigate Sam's report the following week. As Sam prepared to leave, he glanced briefly in Elena's direction, and their eyes met for just a moment. In that instant, Elena saw everything she was giving up reflected in Sam's honest brown eyes. She saw partnership, understanding, mutual respect, and the possibility of genuine happiness. She also saw a man who had no idea that his integrity was being used as a weapon against the woman he cared about. "Miss Thornfield," Sam said politely, tipping his hat, "I hope you're enjoying this beautiful Sunday." "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell," Elena replied formally, acutely aware that her parents and several neighbors were observing their interaction. "I hope your ranch work is going well." It was a meaningless exchange of pleasantries, but Elena felt as if she were saying goodbye to everything she had ever wanted from life. That afternoon, as Elena sat in her bedroom, supposedly writing thank you notes for wedding gifts, she made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She could not marry William Blackwood. She could not spend her life pretending to be happy while dying slowly inside from the loss of her authentic self. She could not condemn herself to decades of empty social obligations and meaningless luxury while the man she loved built a meaningful life without her. But she also could not allow her father to destroy Sam's future as punishment for her choices, which meant that Elena Elizabeth Thornfield was going to have to find a third option that nobody had considered, including herself. As the sun set on what she had decided would be her last day as the obedient sheriff's daughter, Elena began planning the most dangerous gamble of her life. Tomorrow's newspaper would indeed carry an engagement announcement. But if Elena's desperate plan succeeded, it would not be the announcement anyone was expecting. Sunday night, Elena sat at her writing desk composing the most important letter of her life. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote, knowing that the words she was putting on paper would either save or destroy everything she cared about. "My dearest Sam, by the time you read this letter, events will already be in motion that cannot be stopped or changed. I am writing to explain decisions that may seem incomprehensible and to ask for your help with a plan that is both desperate and dangerous. Tomorrow morning, the territorial newspaper will publish the announcement of my engagement to William Blackwood. The wedding is scheduled for next month, and my family expects me to proceed with this arrangement without further protest. I cannot do it. I cannot marry a man I do not love while knowing what true partnership could feel like with the right person. I cannot spend my life pretending to be happy while my heart belongs elsewhere. And I cannot live with the knowledge that I was too cowardly to fight for my own happiness. But I also cannot allow my choices to destroy your future. My father has made it clear that any attempt on my part to break my engagement will result in serious legal and financial consequences for you. He has the power to revoke your land grants and destroy your reputation in the territory, which is why I need your help with a plan that will protect both of us while giving us a chance at the life we both want. Elena paused in her writing, knowing that the next part of the letter would ask Sam to risk everything on a woman he had known for only a few months. But she also knew that this might be their only chance to choose their own future together. Meet me at the old Apache Rock outcropping at dawn tomorrow morning. Come prepared for a long journey and bring supplies for at least a week of travel. I will explain everything then, but I need you to trust me enough to be there. If you cannot or will not take this risk, I will understand. But please know that whatever happens, our conversations over the past month have been the most meaningful experiences of my life. You have shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued, and I will treasure that gift regardless of how this situation resolves. If you feel as I do about the possibility of building a life together, then meet me at Apache Rock. We will have one chance to choose our own destiny, but it will require more courage than either of us has ever needed before. With all my love and hope, Elena sealed the letter carefully and tried to calm her racing heart. Getting the letter to Sam without detection would be the first challenge of her desperate plan. The second challenge would be executing an escape strategy that would get them both safely out of the territory before anyone realized what had happened. The third challenge, building a new life together in a place where they weren't known, would be the test of whether their connection was strong enough to survive the complete upheaval of everything familiar and secure. Elena waited until the house was completely quiet, then slipped out through the kitchen door and made her way carefully through the darkened streets of Silverbrook. She knew exactly which route would take her to Sam's ranch without passing any houses where late-night observers might spot her movement. The 3-mile walk through darkness took nearly 2 hours, but Elena reached Sam's property without incident. She left the letter tucked securely under a rock near his front door, where he would find it first thing in the morning, then began the long walk back to town. As she crept back into her family's house just before dawn, Elena realized that she had already committed herself to a course of action that could never be undone. Whether Sam met her at Apache Rock or not, she had decided that she would not be present for her engagement announcement tomorrow evening. Elena spent Monday morning in a state of nervous anticipation mixed with paralyzing fear. She participated in normal household activities, helped her mother with wedding preparation tasks, and tried to behave as if nothing unusual was happening. But as the morning progressed, Elena became increasingly convinced that her plan was insane and doomed to failure. What if Sam didn't find her letter? What if he found it but decided the risk was too great? What if he met her at Apache Rock but only to explain why they couldn't possibly attempt such a dangerous escape? Most terrifyingly, what if they attempted to leave together and were caught? Elena had no illusions about her father's reaction to such a betrayal. Sheriff Thornfield would use every resource at his disposal to track them down, and the consequences for both of them would be severe. Elena was folding laundry and trying to calm her nerves when her mother appeared in the doorway with an expression of excitement and anticipation. "Elena, dear, you need to start getting ready for this evening's engagement celebration. Mrs. Blackwood has sent over the most beautiful dress for you to wear when William makes the official announcement." Elena's stomach clenched as she realized how many people were already investing time, money, and emotional energy in her engagement to William. Breaking the arrangement now would create a scandal that would reverberate throughout the territory's social circles. But the alternative, going through with a marriage she dreaded, was still impossible to contemplate. "Of course, Mother," Elena said, forcing herself to sound appropriately excited. "I'll begin preparations right away." As Elena bathed and dressed in the elaborate gown that Mrs. Blackwood had provided, she tried to memorize every detail of her childhood home. If her plan succeeded, she might never see this house again, never share another meal with her parents, never participate in the community activities that had defined her entire life. The weight of what she was considering pressed down on her like a physical burden. Elena was about to give up everything familiar and secure for the possibility of happiness with a man she had known for only a few months. The practical part of her mind kept insisting that she was making a terrible mistake based on romantic fantasy rather than realistic assessment. But every time Elena imagined walking down the aisle toward William Blackwood, every time she pictured herself hosting dinner parties for his business associates, every time she thought about spending decades pretending to be content with a life that felt like slow suffocation, she knew that staying was the real mistake. At 5 o'clock, Elena announced that she needed some fresh air before the evening celebration. Her parents were both busy with last-minute preparations, and neither questioned her decision to take a brief walk. Instead of walking toward town, Elena headed directly for Apache Rock. The outcropping was located about 2 miles southeast of Silverbrook, far enough from town to provide privacy, but close enough that Elena could reach it on foot if necessary. As she approached the familiar rock formation, Elena's heart was beating so hard she felt dizzy. Sam was waiting for her. He was standing beside his horse, which was loaded with supplies and equipped for long-distance travel. When he saw Elena approaching, his face showed relief mixed with apprehension. "Elena," Sam said as she reached him, "are you certain about this? Once we leave here together, there won't be any way to undo what we've done." Elena looked into Sam's honest brown eyes and felt the last of her doubts dissolve. "I'm certain. Are you?" Sam reached out and took her hands in his. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, but I need you to understand what we're giving up and what we're risking." "Tell me," Elena said, "if we leave together, you'll be giving up your family, your inheritance, your social position, and probably any chance of ever returning to this territory. You'll be married to a rancher who owns very little and has no guarantee of success in whatever place we choose to settle." Elena nodded. "What else?" "If we're caught, your father will probably see that I'm charged with kidnapping or corrupting an engaged woman. Even if those charges don't stick, my reputation will be destroyed, and I'll never be able to work honestly in any civilized community." Elena squeezed Sam's hands. "And if we succeed?" Sam's expression softened. "If we succeed, we'll have a chance to build a life together based on choice rather than obligation. We'll work hard, probably struggle financially for a while, but we'll be partners in every sense of the word." Elena felt tears of relief and joy start to flow down her cheeks. "That's all I've ever wanted, a real partnership with someone who values my mind and my heart." Sam pulled Elena into his arms and held her tightly. "Then let's go build that life together." As Sam helped Elena onto his horse, and they began riding away from everything she had ever known, Elena felt simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. She was leaving behind security, respectability, and family approval. But she was also choosing love, partnership, and the possibility of authentic happiness. Behind them, the lights of Silverbrook were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere in town, Elena's parents were probably beginning to wonder where she was. Soon they would discover her absence and realize what she had done. Ahead of them lay hundreds of miles of unknown territory, uncertain prospects, and the challenge of building a new life together from nothing. Elena had never been more frightened or more hopeful in her entire life. As they rode through the darkness toward an uncertain but chosen future, Elena whispered a silent goodbye to the girl she had been, and a cautious hello to the woman she was becoming. The sheriff's daughter was gone forever. In her place rode a woman who had chosen love over duty, partnership over security, and authentic happiness over social approval. Whatever happened next, Elena Elizabeth Thornfield would face it as herself, with the man she loved beside her, and the future entirely in their own hands. Back to the present, the wedding day. The church bells were ringing, the guests were seated, and Elena Thornfield stood in her white dress. But the tears streaming down her face weren't tears of joy. In just 10 minutes, she would marry the richest man in Silverbrook, a man she feared, But outside, a simple rancher waited with 2 horses and a desperate plan that would change everything. After 3 months of secret meetings with Sam, Elena had finally reached her breaking point. Her father's threats, William's controlling behavior, and the suffocating weight of everyone's expectations had brought her to this moment of ultimate choice. Elena stood in the small room behind the church altar, staring at herself in the mirror. The elaborate white dress that Mrs. Blackwood had commissioned made her look like a stranger, a beautiful doll dressed for display, rather than a woman preparing for the most important decision of her life. "Elena, dear, it's almost time," her mother said, bustling into the room with last-minute adjustments to the veil. "You look absolutely beautiful. William is so fortunate to be marrying such a lovely bride." Elena nodded mechanically, but her mind was racing. Through the small window, she could see the main street of Silverbrook, where Sam was supposed to be waiting with 2 horses, ready to help her escape from this elaborate trap that had been built around her life. The plan was simple but dangerous. During the wedding ceremony, at the moment when the preacher asked if there were any objections to the marriage, Sam would stand up and declare his love for Elena. In the confusion that followed, they would run from the church, mount the waiting horses, and ride out of territory before anyone could stop them. It was a plan born of desperation, with countless ways it could go wrong. Sheriff Thornfield would be armed and furious. William would probably try to physically prevent Elena from leaving. The entire congregation would witness the scandal, making it impossible for either Elena or Sam to ever return to respectable society in Colorado Territory. But as Elena heard the opening notes of the wedding march beginning in the church, she knew that going through with this marriage would be a different kind of death, the slow suffocation of everything authentic and meaningful about herself. "Elena," her father appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his best uniform and wearing an expression of stern satisfaction. "It's time." Sheriff Thornfield offered his arm to escort his daughter down the aisle, completely unaware that Elena was about to make a choice that would shatter every plan he had made for her future. As they walked toward the church doors, Elena caught sight of Sam through the window. He was indeed waiting across the street, holding the reins of 2 horses and watching the church with intense concentration. When their eyes met for just a moment, Elena saw love, determination, and unwavering support reflected in his honest brown eyes. The church doors opened, and Elena found herself walking down the aisle toward her arranged future. The congregation rose to their feet, all eyes focused on the beautiful bride making her way toward the altar, where William Blackwood waited with a possessive smile. Elena saw Mrs. Henderson dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. She saw the territorial judge and his wife beaming with approval. She saw dozens of family friends and community leaders gathered to witness what they believed would be the social event of the year. At the altar, William stood waiting in his finest suit, his pale gray eyes fixed on Elena with unmistakable satisfaction. Beside him, the preacher held his prayer book and prepared to conduct the ceremony that would legally bind Elena to a man she could never love. As Sheriff Thornfield placed Elena's hand in William's and stepped back, Elena felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a physical force. This was her last chance to choose her own destiny. The preacher began the traditional ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of William Blackwood and Elena Thornfield in holy matrimony." Elena barely heard the words. Her entire attention was focused on the moment that was coming, the moment when everything would change forever. "Marriage is a sacred institution," the preacher continued, "entered into with reverence, discretion, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was established." Elena glanced toward the church doors and saw Sam slip quietly inside, taking a position in the back where he could act quickly when the time came. If any person can show just cause why these two should not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The church fell silent. This was the moment Elena had been waiting for, praying for, and dreading in equal measure. Sam rose slowly to his feet. "I object to this marriage," he said in a clear, strong voice that carried throughout the church. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the congregation. Sheriff Thornfield's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon. William's face darkened with rage and disbelief. "On what grounds?" the preacher asked, clearly flustered by this unprecedented disruption. On the grounds that the bride is being forced into this union against her will, Sam replied, walking steadily down the aisle toward the altar. And on the grounds that she loves another man who can offer her partnership, respect, and genuine happiness. The church erupted in shocked voices and confused exclamations. Elena felt her heart pounding as she realized that the moment of choice had finally arrived. Elena, Sam said, reaching the altar and extending his hand toward her. Come with me. Choose your own happiness. Sheriff Thornfield stepped forward, his face thunderous with rage. You have no legal standing to interrupt this ceremony, Mitchell. Elena is engaged to Mr. Blackwood, and this marriage will proceed as planned. No, Elena said quietly, but her voice carried clearly through the church. It won't. She looked at William, seeing the cold calculation and possessive anger in his pale eyes, then looked at Sam, seeing love, hope, and unwavering support. Elena reached up and carefully removed the heavy diamond engagement ring from her finger. William, she said, holding out the ring, I cannot marry you. I do not love you, and I believe marriage should be based on mutual affection and respect rather than social advantage. William's face contorted with fury. You ungrateful little fool. Do you have any idea what you're throwing away? Status, security, everything any sensible woman would want? I'm throwing away a life that would make me miserable, Elena replied with growing confidence, and I'm choosing a life that might make me happy. She turned to Sam and placed her hand in his. Yes, she said simply, I choose my own happiness. Sheriff Thornfield drew his weapon. No one is leaving this church until this situation is resolved properly. Elena, you will proceed with this marriage as planned, or you will face the consequences of defying your family and your community. Papa, Elena said, looking directly into her father's steel blue eyes, I love you, and I respect the values you've tried to teach me, but I cannot live my entire life according to other people's plans for my future. I have to choose for myself, even if that choice disappoints you. If you leave with this man, Sheriff Thornfield said coldly, you will no longer be my daughter. You will be dead to this family and unwelcome in this community. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, but her voice remained steady. Then I guess this is goodbye. She turned toward Sam, still wearing her elaborate wedding dress, but feeling more like herself than she had in months. Are you ready to start our real life together? Sam asked quietly. I've been ready since the day we met, Elena replied. Hand in hand, Elena and Sam walked quickly toward the church doors as the congregation erupted in chaos behind them. Sheriff Thornfield was shouting orders. William was demanding that someone stop them, and dozens of voices were raised in shock and confusion. As they reached the doors, Elena heard her mother calling her name with desperate pleading. For a moment, Elena almost turned back, almost gave in to the lifetime of conditioning that told her to be obedient, dutiful, and proper. But Sam squeezed her hand gently, and Elena remembered what it felt like to be truly seen and valued by someone who wanted her partnership rather than her submission. They ran from the church together, Elena gathering up her wedding dress to avoid tripping as they raced toward the waiting horses. Behind them, Elena could hear pursuit beginning as her father and several other men rushed from the church. Sam helped Elena mount her horse, and within seconds they were galloping out of Silverbrook toward the open territory beyond. Elena had never ridden so fast in her life, her wedding veil streaming behind her like a white banner of rebellion. As the town faded into the distance behind them, Elena felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had given up everything familiar and secure for the possibility of authentic happiness with a man who valued her mind, her heart, and her dreams. They rode hard for several hours before stopping to rest the horses and consider their next moves. As they sat beside a small stream, sharing water and catching their breath, Sam took Elena's hands in his work-roughened ones. Elena, he said seriously, you know there's no going back from this choice. Are you sure this is what you want? Elena looked at Sam's honest, caring face and felt more certain than she had ever been about anything in her life. Sam Mitchell, she said with a smile that felt like sunshine breaking through storm clouds, will you marry me? Not because our families arranged it, not because it's socially advantageous, but because we choose each other. Sam's face broke into the most beautiful smile Elena had ever seen. "Elena Thornfield, I would be honored to marry you, and to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing love over duty." As they prepared to continue their journey toward Oregon Territory, where they could start fresh without the weight of family expectations and social obligations, Elena felt as if she were being born into a new life. Behind them lay everything she had ever known: family, security, social position, and the approval of her community. Ahead lay uncertainty, hard work, and the challenge of building a life together from nothing. But riding beside her was a man who saw her as a complete person rather than a decorative object, who valued her opinions and dreams, who wanted her partnership in building something meaningful together. For the first time in her 22 years, Elena was choosing her own destiny. And despite the risks and uncertainties ahead, she had never felt more hopeful about the future. The sheriff's daughter was gone forever. In her place rode a woman who had chosen love over security, partnership over submission, and authentic happiness over social approval. Whatever challenges awaited them in their new life together, Elena and Sam would face them as equals, as partners, and as two people who had been brave enough to choose love when the entire world told them to choose duty instead. As they rode toward the setting sun and their uncertain but chosen future, Elena whispered a promise to herself. She would never again allow anyone else to make the important decisions about her life. She had learned what it felt like to choose her own happiness, and she would never give up that hard-won freedom. The girl who had been raised to be obedient, dutiful, and proper was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth and had the courage to fight for her own dreams. And that, Elena realized, was the person she had been meant to be all along. And that's the story of Elena Thornfield, the sheriff's daughter who chose love over duty and partnership over security. Sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is choose our own happiness, even when everyone else thinks we're making a mistake. Elena and Sam's story reminds us that real love isn't about finding someone who fits into our existing life. It's about finding someone worth building a completely new life with. Someone who sees us as we really are and values our authentic self over our social position or family connections. Their escape from Silverbrook wasn't just a romantic adventure. It was a declaration that individual happiness and personal choice matter more than social expectations and family obligations. Elena chose to be true to herself rather than live a lie for other people's comfort. What do you think about Elena's choice? Was she brave or foolish to give up everything for love? Do you think she and Sam built a happy life together in Oregon Territory? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing your thoughts about these historical love stories. If you enjoyed this tale of forbidden love in the Wild West, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I post new historical romances every week, featuring couples who defied convention to choose their own happiness. And if you want to see more stories about women who change their destinies for love, give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps me continue researching and sharing these incredible true stories of courage, romance, and the power of choosing your own path. Coming up next week, I'll be telling you about Sarah McKenna, the Irish immigrant who disguised herself as a man to work on the Transcontinental Railroad and found love with a fellow worker who discovered her secret. It's a story of identity, courage, and unexpected romance that will leave you amazed by what people will do for love. Don't forget to check out my other videos about historical romances, and thank you so much for joining me on Elena and Sam's journey. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest adventure is having the courage to choose your own happiness. See you next week for another incredible love story from America's past.